In the days of the judges, Israel lived under constant oppression by the Philistines, a strong and cruel people who seemed unshakable. My people cried out for deliverance, and I heard their pleas. I decided to act, raising up someone who would be the embodiment of strength, courage, and divine purpose. A man set apart from the womb, whose mission would be to free Israel and remind the world that I never abandon those who trust in me. Today, I want to tell you the story of my strongest son. He was not just a man with unmatched physical strength, he was a chosen one, called to fulfill a greater mission. Yet, he faced not only external enemies, but also the internal battles of his humanity. Because often, even the strongest among us can stumble over our own weaknesses. But let me ask you, have you ever felt called to something so great that it seemed impossible? Have you ever faced struggles that required not only your strength, but also my help? If so, come with me. Don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to the channel, because this story is more than a tale of strength. It is a story of purpose, redemption, and the power of trusting in me. This is the story of Samson. It all began with a promise. Manoah and his wife were righteous, but they were burdened with the sadness of having no children. For them, the hope of an heir seemed distant, until, on a day that would change everything, a heavenly messenger appeared to Manoah's wife.
You will have a son, and he will be separated from the womb. You will begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines.
These words brought joy and fear, for it was not just the announcement of a son, but of a divine purpose. The angel gave clear instructions.
He will be a Nazirite, consecrated to God from birth. He must not drink wine, eat anything unclean, and his hair must never be cut.
These instructions were not just rules, but signs of a sacred commitment. Manoah, upon hearing his wife's words, asked the Lord to send the messenger again to confirm how they should raise the boy. And so it was. The messenger returned and reaffirmed.
See that all the instructions are followed, for he is set apart for a great purpose.
When Samson was born, Manoah and his wife looked upon him with admiration and reverence. The boy was special, and each day of his childhood reminded them that he had been sent to something greater. They taught him about the Nazirite vow, about his strength, and about the God who had called him. But they also carried the weight of responsibility, for they knew that Samson was not only their son, but an instrument in the hands of the Creator. However, growing up with such a great mission is not easy. From an early age, Samson stood out. His strength was unmatched, and he seemed destined for extraordinary feats. But, like everyone else, he was human, with weaknesses and impulses that were beginning to manifest themselves. His parents watched him with admiration, but also with concern, for they knew that his strength, left unchecked, could become a dangerous weapon. The promise that brought Samson into the world was both a blessing and a burden. He was the promised deliverer, but his journey would be marked by challenges that would test not only his physical strength, but also his fidelity to the purpose for which he had been set apart. Samson grew up under the watchful eyes of his parents, who never forgot the promise that had brought him into the world. From a young age, he demonstrated an unusual strength, an ability that impressed everyone around him.
This boy is different.
The neighbors said, but for Manoah and his wife, this strength was not only a gift, it was also a responsibility. Once, while still a young man, Samson pulled a log out of the ground with ease. His father, observing the feat, asked,
"Do you understand why God gave you this strength?"
Samson responded with a smile, but without words, as if he did not yet fully understand the purpose behind his ability. He knew he was strong, but he did not understand the weight of carrying the mission of freeing Israel. As he grew older, Samson began to demonstrate a bold and, at times, impulsive spirit. He was a young man with great potential, but also a tendency to pursue his own desires without regard for the consequences. He once confronted a group of Philistine youths in a nearby village. They mocked him, but Samson knocked one of them to the ground with a single blow. His strength frightened the others, who fled in despair. Yet his strength was not enough to resolve the internal conflicts that were beginning to arise.
Samson,
His mother said one night,
you cannot rely on your strength alone. It was given to you by God, and you must use it for the right purpose.
He listened, but in his heart, he struggled to balance his role as a liberator with his own human impulse. Samson began to attract attention, both from his own countrymen and from his enemies. The Philistines saw him as a growing threat, while his people viewed him with hope and, at times, with fear. He was a young man who carried a great destiny, but was still learning to deal with the strength that made him unique. And although his achievements were impressive, they were only the beginning of a journey marked by victories, mistakes, and choices that would shape his legacy. And then came the moment when Samson saw, for the first time, the true extent of the strength I had given him. As he walked toward Timnah, passing vineyards along the way, a young lion stepped out of the shadows and charged at him. The roar echoed through the valley, and the beast's eyes gleamed with the fury of a predator on the attack. But my strongest son did not recover. He carried no weapons, no protection, only his hands and the strength I had placed within him. And in that instant, my power manifested itself through him. Samson launched himself at the lion with astonishing speed. The animal roared, trying to escape the crushing grip, but there was no force on earth that could break the hold of my hands on a chosen one. Effortlessly, he tore the beast apart as if it were a young goat, and silence fell over the valley. Without looking back, Samson sped on his way. I did not tell his parents what had happened. To him, it had been just a moment, proof that the strength he carried within him was real. But that lion, now lying lifeless, would still have a role to play in his journey. Days later, when he returned by the same path, Samson looked at the lion's carcass and saw something unexpected. A swarm of bees had made their home there. Honey came out of the animal's body, glistening in the sunlight. Samson moved, reached in, and took some of the honeycomb. He put the honey in his mouth and tasted its sweet flavor, and took it to his parents. But it showed no sign of where it came from. What Samson did not see at that moment was that that honey was not only food for his body, but an omen. Strength can generate sweetness, but it can also hide traps. Just like the lion, who seemed like a threat, but ended up becoming a source of something sweet. Samson would see moments in his life when what seemed like a victory could in fact be a test, and that test was yet to come. Samson was no longer a young man seeking adventure. Now he was beginning to make decisions that would shape his life and legacy. On one of his trips to a Philistine village, he saw a woman who caught his eye. Samson returned home, determined.
Father, mother, I have found a woman in Timnah. I want her to be my wife.
Surprised, his parents asked,
Why would you choose a woman from the Philistines, our oppressors? Is there no one among our people?
but Samson insisted.
She pleases me. She is the one I want to marry.
Samson's request troubled Manoah and his wife. They did not understand why he would choose someone from an enemy people. But even in his questionable choices, Samson was being used for a greater purpose. Because I was preparing a way for him to begin confronting the Philistines, the marriage at Timnah was not just a union, but the beginning of a conflict that would shake the foundations of that people. During the wedding celebration, Samson posed a riddle to the Philistine guests.
Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. If you can solve this in 7 days, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 wedding clothes.
The Philistines, frustrated at their inability to solve the riddle, pressed Samson's wife.
Find the answer, or we will destroy you and your family.
Fearing for her life, she begged Samson.
If you love me, tell me the answer to the riddle.
Reluctantly, he relented, and she revealed the secret to the Philistines. At the end of the banquet, the guests answered the riddle.
What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?
Samson realized the betrayal and, furious, left the celebration. He went down to Ashkelon, faced 30 Philistines, and brought his clothes to pay off the bet. But the wedding was ruined. His wife was given to another man, which further inflamed Samson's anger. Consumed with indignation, Samson used an unusual strategy to inflict damage on the Philistines. He gathered together countless foxes and released them into the fields, carrying torches that spread fire across the fields. In doing so, he destroyed entire fields of wheat, vineyards, and olive groves, causing a devastating impact on the Philistine economy. The enraged Philistines sought revenge, but the conflict that began at that wedding was only just beginning. What seemed like a simple personal episode would become the catalyst for a larger battle between Israel and its oppressors. The conflict between Samson and the Philistines was growing like a storm about to explode. His actions had shaken the security of Israel's oppressors, and they were determined to subdue him. A large army was gathered and sent to Lehi, a region of Judah. Their leaders, filled with pride, shouted to the Israelites,
"Hand over Samson to us, or we will destroy your land and your homes."
The threat was clear, and fear gripped the hearts of my people. A delegation of men from Judah was sent to Samson. They found him in a nearby valley and with expressions of despair said,
"Don't you understand that the Philistines rule over us? Why have you brought this upon us? They demand that we hand him over, or we will all suffer."
Samson, hearing their words, remained calm. He knew that the Philistines were not only enemies of Israel, but also enemies of me. So he answered,
I had only done to them what they did to me. Tee me up and hand me over, but promise me that you will not raise your hand against me.
Reluctantly, the men of Judah agreed. With new ropes, they bound Samson and led him to the Philistine camp. Every step was accompanied by the fearful gaze of his countrymen, who could not understand how Samson could remain so calm. To them, he was a mystery, a man apart, yet so human. When they reached the camp, the Philistines burst into shouts of triumph. To them, the battle was won before it had even begun. As the Philistines approached, ready to capture my strongest son, I descended upon him with power. The ropes that bound him unraveled like burning flax. In an instant, the Philistines' shouts of victory were replaced by the silence of fear. They realized that they were not facing an ordinary man, but someone who carried a strength far beyond human comprehension. Samson, free, was ready to face those who thought they had subdued him. With the ropes broken, Samson looked around and saw a donkey's jawbone on the ground. He picked it up and charged at the Philistines with the strength I had given him. The battle was fierce, and war cries echoed through the valley. The soldiers advanced in waves, confident that they could overwhelm him with their numbers. But each blow Samson struck cut a path through them. The jawbone in his hands became a deadly weapon, and his strength a reminder that I was with him. The Philistines, who had once marched confidently, now tried to retreat.
How can we stand against him?
They shouted to each other, but there was no escape. Samson was determined to fight to the end. Dust rose on the battlefield as the bodies of his enemies fell. By the end of the battle, 1,000 men lay on the ground, defeated by the strength of a single man. Samson, panting and covered in sweat, raised his jawbone and cried out in a loud voice,
With the jawbone of a donkey, I have defeated them. With one jawbone, 1,000 men have fallen.
His voice echoed, and for a moment, the field was silent. But soon, exhaustion overcame him, and Samson fell to his knees, overcome with thirst. He looked up to heaven and cried out,
O Lord, it was you who gave me this great victory. Now must I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised.
His cry was sincere, and I heard it. I caused a cleft to open in the ground, and fresh water gushed out. He drank deeply, regaining his strength, and he called that place En-Hakkore, the spring of him who cries. But that moment was more than a physical provision. It was a reminder that Samson's strength was never his own, but always mine. He had defeated 1,000 men, but without my help, he would not have survived the battle. The jawbone was a tool, but the real power came from me. And Samson, in that moment, understood that his life was sustained by something much greater than himself. With each victory, Samson's name became a symbol of terror among the Philistines. But as his enemies feared him, Samson began to tread a dangerous path. My strongest son, in his humanity, was carried away by confidence in his own strength. Although set apart for a divine purpose, he did not yet fully understand the balance between the power I had given him and the responsibility that came with it. The Philistines, humbled by their defeats, gathered to plan their next move. They knew they could not face him in direct combat, so they sought to exploit his human weaknesses.
Samson cannot be defeated by force, but every man has his weaknesses. Let us watch him, study him, and wait for the right moment to act.
They began to monitor his movements, looking for any opportunity to capture him. Meanwhile, Samson, though victorious, felt the weight of his journey. He was a man of unparalleled strength, but he was also deeply lonely. His own people viewed him with suspicion, and his enemies pursued him relentlessly. He had no resting place, no companions who understood his mission. This loneliness made him vulnerable, and the Philistines watched his every step. One night while Samson was in Gaza, the Philistines learned of his presence. Recognizing an opportunity, the Philistine leaders gathered their men and locked the city gates.
Wait until dawn. When he tries to come out, we will be ready to capture him.
The city was surrounded, and the Philistines believed that they had finally cornered my chosen one. As they waited in the darkness, their confidence grew, certain that this would be the night Samson would fall. But they did not understand the full extent of the power I had given him. The pride of the Philistines blinded them to the fact that no human plan can prevail against a divine purpose. And that night, as the city slept, something was about to happen that would change the course of history. Darkness still covered Gaza, and the Philistines waited patiently for dawn. They were certain that the trap was set, that Samson, surrounded, would have nowhere to run.
At first light, he will be ours.
They whispered to each other, confident that for the first time they had the strongest man in Israel under their control. But while they slept peacefully in their arrogance, Samson rose. He noticed the silence around him, felt the presence of the soldiers scattered throughout the city. There was no safe path, no open gates, but he knew he did not need them. The strength I had given him was greater than any human obstacle. Taking a deep breath, he walked to the gates of Gaza, his footprints firm in the packed earth. The gates were tall, reinforced with iron and heavy timber, protected by solid bars and posts driven deep into the ground. To the Philistines, this was absolute security. To Samson, it was nothing more than a temporary barrier. He stood before the great doors, braced his hands on their sides, and then the silence of the night was shattered by a deafening sound. With a burst of divine strength, Samson ripped the gates from the ground. Wood and metal groaned in despair. The posts came out of the earth as if they were nothing. The entire city woke to the sound of the crash, sounds of locks breaking, of structures giving way. The nearest guards stood up in a daze, trying to understand what was happening.
What was that?
One of them shouted, drawing his sword.
The gates are falling!
Another replied, his eyes wide with disbelief. Samson lifted the gates onto his shoulders, carrying them as if they were nothing more than a light burden. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the streets of Gaza as he walked, carrying with him what the Philistines considered their greatest symbol of protection. The city awoke in chaos. People peered through the windows. Soldiers ran, trying to make sense of what they saw.
He's taking the gates. How is this possible?
Exclaimed one of the warriors, while another just fell to his knees, speechless. Samson did not turn around, heedless of the shouts around him. He climbed the nearby hill, and there, at the top, he nailed the gates to the ground. This moment was not just an escape, it was an absolute humiliation for the Philistines. What should have been a trap became a trophy of their strength. What was meant to be security became shame. The hill where the gates were placed became an eternal symbol that no human plan can prevail against divine purpose. But amidst all that glory, there was also a warning. My strongest son was beginning to believe too much in his own invincibility. Each victory lifted him higher, but pride rose with it. He did not yet understand that true power lay not in what one could carry on one's shoulders, but in the humility of recognizing where that strength came from. The night of the gates was a moment of triumph, but also a harbinger of things to come. For Samson's greatest battle would not yet be against armies or gates, but against himself. Samson's story up to that point had been a series of impressive victories, but also of choices that began to reveal a dangerous pattern. My chosen one had demonstrated unparalleled strength, but in his humanity, he failed to realize that each victory came with a spiritual weight. The gates of Gaza, carried like a trophy to the top of the hill, were a reminder to the Philistines that no human plan can overcome divine power. But for Samson, they also marked a moment of pride that obscured the source of his strength. Israel watched from afar, seeing in Samson a mixture of hope and mystery. He was a liberator who did not follow the conventional path. A man set apart for a greater purpose, but who also seemed to act according to his own will. His strength was undeniable, but his heart was torn between the calling I had given him and the desires that often led him astray. The Philistines, on the other hand, were more determined than ever to find a way to defeat him. The humiliation of being taken away from the gates of Gaza was not just a physical blow, it was an attack on the pride of their leaders. They began to watch him even more closely, searching not only for his strengths, but also for his weaknesses. For even the strongest man, if not guided by wisdom, can be overcome by his own mistakes. Samson, in his solitude, began to seek companionship in places where his presence was not safe. Gaza was only the beginning of a path that would lead him to involve himself with those who did not share the purpose for which he was set apart. Soon, he would cross paths with a woman who would test not only his physical strength, but also his spiritual strength. Her name, Delilah, would be remembered forever as part of the history of my chosen one. But that is a story for another time. For now, remember that even the strongest must recognize the source of their strength. If this story touched you, share in the comments what impacted you the most. We want to know how you see Samson's journey and what we can learn from it. Your opinion is very important and helps to enrich our community. Thank you for watching and for diving with us into this powerful story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to follow the next part. Next, we will see how Samson faced his greatest challenge and how, even in his weaknesses, he became a testimony of redemption and purpose. May the peace of the Lord be with you, and may your life be strengthened by God's wisdom and grace. See you in the next video, where we will continue this incredible story of faith, courage, and transformation.